Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 191 event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 5 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 74 went 0-3 to lose 6.5 units overall. We lost our underdog plays on Charles Oliveira and Tony Sims, as well as our bet on Josh Berkman. Our free bet parlay on a pair of totals also lost 1 unit. Back to the present, UFC 191 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now kicking off the preliminary card, we have a lightweight battle between Joaquim Silva, who is 7-0, and Nazareno Malagari, who is 27-3. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Malegarie minus 245, the comeback on Silva plus 175. And this fight has really seen some action. Right now, over at 5dimes.eu, our official sponsor of the Premium Oddscast, it is now Malegarie minus 130, the comeback on Silva is plus 110. And looking at the Don Best screen across the board, most sportsbooks have it around that 130 mark as well. So, competitive line right now. It should be a fairly competitive matchup. I'm a little bit surprised. Now, of course, both these guys are tough for Brazil veterans, and they both lost in the semifinals, so they've had some success on the Ultimate Fighter show. But Malegarie is definitely the more well-known fighter to, I think, the hardcore fans, because he had that Bellator experience. He competed in Bellator a few times. He actually went 0-3, but against solid competition, the likes of Strauss, Sandro Martinez, all very capable fighters, all decent opponents, so really not bad losses, considering he was very competitive in those bouts as well. And those guys could, honestly, I think, win some fights in the UFC, so no shame in those losses. But Malegarie is up at 155 for this fight again, as he was on the show, and he really belongs in the lower weight class. So I'm sure we'll see him in the future move down to 145. But right now against Silva, I mean, Silva's a fairly, I don't want to say a big lightweight, but he does have some power, some size, and he does have an advantage over Malegarie in that aspect. But overall, Silva, if you look back before the Ultimate Fighter, he has really a weak level of competition. He's still very raw. He's developing his game. He's only 26 years old, so he's still young as well. But he's more well known for his BJJ and ground skill. But to me, it's his power and his big right hand that is really what you have to watch out for when facing Silva, because his grappling and his jiu-jitsu game is okay, but I think it's a tad bit overrated, to be honest with you. And I think Malegarie actually has the advantage on the ground, because Silva's takedown defense is a tad bit suspect, especially with his aggressiveness. He makes some mistakes. He loses position on the ground. He's just a little bit too aggressive, and most of his fights have actually ended in the first round because of that weaker level competition as well. So he is somebody definitely to respect because of his big power, and he does have a well-rounded skill set, so he's going to be always dangerous. But that being said, I do think even though Malegarie's not in his proper weight class, he is the better fighter at this point. At least he's the more established fighter. He's faced the better competition. I don't think he's going to be really outside of his element too bad, where it is kind of a step up in competition again for Silva, where it's not as much for Malegarie. So if Malegarie does not get clipped and knocked out, I think he probably wins his fight, because he's going to probably end up controlling the pace of the fight. So I am going to pick Malegarie here. I do understand why. I did probably open the line obviously too high, because I was anticipating the public to actually bet it up a little bit, and they did not. So I am anticipating this fight to be close and competitive, but I'm going to lean with Malegarie getting the win here, because I just think he's a little bit more stable at this point for me, and I think he's a little bit more well-rounded and more capable of winning this fight if he doesn't get clipped and knocked out. So Malegarie it is.
Yeah, overall, the biggest problem for Malegarie here is the fact that he is a lighter fighter moving up. And Joaquim Silva is a guy that can hang around in the lightweight division if he wants to. I mean, he's fought at welterweight before, and Malegarie, while he fought in Bellator at featherweight, he's actually since dropped down even to the bantamweight division. So he's moving back up 2 weight classes for his time on The Ultimate Fighter and then for this fight. So while him and Silva are actually the same size, Silva is definitely more filled out. He's a lot stronger physically. So Malagari is going to have his work cut out for him in trying to drag this fight to the ground, because on the feet, Silva is definitely the better fighter here. Silva, when he's in the stand-up portion, he will look to move forward, control the center of the cage, and then try to pick his spots. And then when he does, he usually can unload with some big combinations. Sometimes he'll just go one shot at a time, but he is a very powerful striker with a big right hand. So Malagari is going to have to be very careful. Now, in terms of the grappling realm, Silva has been taken down. He got taken down in his fight to get in the house. He got taken down in his loss on the house. And I definitely feel if Malagari can get inside, he should be able to take him down. So in terms of ground game, Malagari is light years ahead of Silva, in my opinion. He has the better wrestling. He has good positional control. He has excellent ground and pound. He won a fight on The Ultimate Fighter by ground and pound. And then, dating back to his Bellator days, he has some really good guillotine chokes and some submissions. So I definitely feel that if this fight gets taken to the ground, which is where Malagari is most comfortable, that's where he's going to win. But he's going to have to wade through Silva's strikes to do it, and that is a dangerous proposition. So I'm favoring Malagari because usually I do always favor the wrestler or the superior ground fighter as long as they have the ability to get it to the ground. But he is going to have to be cautious en route to doing that. Malagari is not a great striker. He basically throws short 1-2 combinations. Most of his striking is just an attempt to lull his opponent to a sense of false security and then get inside and take it to the ground. So he absolutely does need to get this to the ground, and then hopefully he can get out of this fight unscathed and drop down some weight classes, because he does not belong in the lightweight division. But my pick is Malagari. Now moving all the way up to the middleweight division, we have Joe Riggs, who is 40-15 with 1 no contest, taking on Ron Stallings, who is 13-7 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Stallings minus 140, the comeback on Riggs even money, and right now it is Stallings minus 160, the comeback is plus 140 on Riggs, so a little bit more action coming in Stallings' way. This is a tough one. I mean, Riggs going back up to 185 for one is a bit of a head scratcher. I know he had a difficult weight cut to make 170 for sure. I mean, you could tell in the UFC with his couple recent appearances, it was a bad weight cut, but that being said, I still think it's probably the better weight class for him because of his size, because of his skill set. I know 170 is tough from top to bottom, don't get me wrong. And in the UFC, it'll be a very difficult division for him as well. But I think with his age right now, and especially in MMA years, I mean, he's beyond 32. So he's not really that old if you look at his real age. But, I mean, in MMA years, again, like we always say, he's way beyond that. So 185 getting hit by bigger, stronger guys, I'm not sure is the right move for Riggs, but we'll see. I mean, he obviously has a good camp behind him with the MMA lab. They've done wonders for his career, kind of resurrected his career, and he's looked okay. And as far as skill set goes, Riggs is actually the better overall fighter, I think, than Stallings. But heading over to Stallings now, I mean, Stallings is, again, a savvy vet. Even though he doesn't have that UFC experience, he has some decent experience throughout his career. He's faced decent level competition, and he is a fairly well-rounded fighter himself. He's got, of course, a good camp behind him. I mean, he trains with Lloyd Irvin, so he's legit on the ground for sure, but his stand-up game is honestly pretty sound and solid as well. He has a lot of power. He's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage, I believe, over Riggs as well on the feet. He's a southpaw. Both these guys are southpaws, actually, so that should make things interesting. So I think this is going to be a close competitive fight, and it's hard to trust either guy, even though I think in MMA years, Riggs is obviously the older fighter here. They're both 32 years old, but Stallings isn't exactly young in MMA years either. He does have experience, not quite as much as Riggs. So both these guys have taken some punishment throughout their careers. I honestly trust Stallings a little bit more at this point because Riggs has just been through so much. Even though he is the better, I think, overall fighter, it's just hard to imagine, again, moving back up to 185 against a guy that hits fairly hard and is looking to make, his impact in the UFC and coming off of a successful performance in Stallings, I'm talking about here, obviously. I think he's going to have confidence. I think he's going to have a little bit more momentum on his side than Riggs right now. So I'm leaning a little bit more towards Stallings. That you cannot have true confidence in this fight, to be honest with you, either way, because again, Riggs is the better fighter. So I'm going to pick Stallings because I think he could keep this fight upright and probably do more damage. Riggs is going to look for takedowns, and I think that's going to be his key to success here, and at least to slow the fight down a little bit and maybe win a decision on the cards. I think it is going to be hard for Riggs to finish Stallings. I think there is a possibility Stallings might finish Riggs along the way as well. But either way, it will be a very competitive, close fight. So I'm going to lean towards Stallings, but you cannot be confident with either one of these guys at this point.
Yeah, Joe Riggs has not had a very successful return to the UFC so far. He injured himself in his re-debut against Ben Saunders, and then lost a decision against Patrick Cote. But he's moving up to middleweight. He's going to see how he performs without having to cut as much weight, because I know that cut to 170 is pretty brutal for him. And he's not going to be giving up any size really against Ron Stallings. They're about the same height, should be about the same reach. But in terms of physical strength, I do think Stallings might be able to have him there. But Joe Riggs definitely should have the superior wrestling. Now, Stallings is probably the better striker here. He's not a great striker, but he showed in that Justin Smith fight that he can hold his own on the feet and outwork his opponent. And I think Joe Riggs is pretty limited overall on the feet. He's nothing that special. And Riggs is a bit chinny, but hey, maybe moving up to the middleweight division should help that a little bit. And with Ron Stallings, I think Stallings is probably going to go after him a little bit. You know, he's a pretty powerful, dangerous guy. And Stallings definitely does have the ability to finish this fight if he connects with something solid against Riggs. Now, Stallings also does have a decent submission game, but I don't know how well effective that's going to be against Joe Riggs, because Riggs has excellent wrestling and he is primarily a grappler. So I don't think Stallings is going to surprise him with anything on the ground. So this is an interesting dynamic, because Stallings should be the better fighter in open space. Stallings does have a solid submission repertoire, and Joe Riggs is the better wrestler with some decent submission defense. So I expect them to kind of neutralize each other, and it's just going to all come down to whether or not Joe Riggs can repeatedly take Ron Stallings down and keep him down. I think the move up to middleweight should actually help Joe Riggs' cardio as well. He should be able to go pretty hard for all 3 rounds. But overall, I think Joe Riggs, even though he's the younger guy, he's so many fights, so much wear and tear on his body. And I think Ron Stallings is a little bit fresher and probably connects with something at some point. So I don't feel crazy confident about it, but I'm going to lean with Ron Stallings here. Now moving on to the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have a featherweight contest between Clay Collard, who is 14-6 with 1 no contest, taking on Tiago Trator, who is 19-5-2 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Collard minus 185, the comeback on Trator plus 145, and right now it's Collard minus 135, the comeback on Trator is plus 115. So more support coming in on Trator. This is a tough fight because, you know what, this is kind of the battle of the letdowns in a lot of ways, because in their fight, in his last fight, Collard, obviously he had a terrible performance against a very game Gabriel Benitez. Collard's always had that bit of a cardio issue, even before his UFC debut against Holloway, that he did slow down and ultimately he lost that fight. If you look back through his footage, you could tell he does slow down as fights go on. So, you know, he bounced back after that Holloway loss with a relatively impressive performance against White, but then we've seen a little bit of his true colors again. High altitude or not in Mexico, whatever the case may be, Collard didn't look that good. I was expecting a better performance from him. And then Trator in his last fight, of course, that was a surprise as well, because, I mean, his strike defense and his chin really, that wasn't expected. I mean, the way he actually ended up getting put out there in that fight was a bit of a surprise, because De La Torre has a little bit of knockout power for sure, but a lot of people believe that Trator was probably the better overall striker in that fight, and they expected some good things for him. So him getting knocked out as early as he did in that fight was a letdown as well. So both of these guys are coming off terrible performances, in my opinion, especially Trator coming off that knockout loss. So it's a head scratcher with this fight, because a lot of hype was around Trator before. A lot of potential was around Collard. A lot of people thought that, he'd put a nice little win streak together to continue to improve, because Collard's only 22 years old. Trator's really not that old either at age 28. So a lot of high expectations here, but they just haven't really performed up to it. Now, again, that's one bad performance for each guy, but that shows a lot. So I'm not sure how this fight is going to play out, because both of them defensively are pretty flawed. But what I'm going to think happens in this fight is it's going to be close. On the feet, obviously, Trator is a very powerful fighter. He has really good work in the clinch as well. He's effective and powerful there. Ground game wise, I think Trator has the better pure submission game overall. even though his sub defense is a little bit questionable at times as well throughout his career, he has improved on that as well. But I think Collard will be the more active fighter. He pushes basically a higher pace throughout. He has the wrestling advantage in this fight as well. His conditioning is a little lackluster there, of course. So if he comes into this fight, I know he might not struggle as much as he did in Mexico in this fight either. So that should probably help him. I'm going to lean a little bit towards Collard because of those. I think he can get some takedowns along the way here. He has to be cautious on the ground. He can't really, fight with a bad fight IQ where he could get caught on the ground against Trator as well. I think even if it does stay upright and he has a difficult time taking Trator to the floor, I think he's going to be a little bit busier and he can maybe control up against Cage as well. So my official pick is going to be Collard here, but I can understand some early dog action coming in on this fight. For me, it's a difficult one to bet, a difficult one to pick as well, because I think they both showed so many flaws in their last performance that it's hard to trust either one of these guys. But from what I have seen thus far, I think it is a little bit more of a winnable fight for Collard. So that's why I'm going to go Collard's way.
Yeah, both of these guys looked absolutely terrible in their last fights. Trator especially, I thought that he was a lot better striker than that, and really he showed himself as a bit of a one-trick pony with his kicks, because in terms of pure punching, he got completely outlanded by Mike De La Torre. De La Torre was able to connect repeatedly with his left hand and ended up putting him out with it. I mean, it was a very impressive performance on that regard. Now, with Collard, I really thought he was going to do better against Benitez, but Benitez was just the sharper, quicker, crisper, more technical striker. He was able to just get in there and get out and land, and Collard wasn't able to hit him very well. Collard is a guy that usually prides himself on a high pace and high output, but he got outworked. Now, in terms of overall striking skills, Trator is probably going to be the better kicker here, although Collard does mix in kicks well in combination when he's throwing strikes aggressively. And with Collard's boxing, I do expect Collard to get the better of pure stand-up exchanges when he gets a little further inside. And Collard is at his absolute best when he's able to back his opponent up towards the fence, because that's where he really likes to unload combinations. And he'll start throwing with a bit of reckless abandon. Now, Collard's striking defense is terrible. It's one of the worst on the entire card, most likely. But his best striking defense is actually his offense. He just likes to keep a high output, keep his opponent defensive, and then unless they're very good at counter-striking, he's usually able to just, outwork his opponent. Against a guy like Tiago Trator, thankfully, he's more of a kicker. He's not a great boxer, so I think Collard should be in the clear in this department. Collard doesn't have some pretty good durability, but he takes a lot of punishment too, so that's going to add up eventually. Overall, I think Collard does slow down in fights a little bit more than Trator, but that was in Mexico City for his last fight, which is 7,000 feet elevation, probably the highest place that the UFC ever has had fights. So I expect his conditioning to be a little bit better this time around, especially because he does train in the Utah area, which has a little bit of elevation. So this time around, I expect Collard to come in very aggressive. Collard probably has the biggest advantage in the wrestling department. He does mix in takedowns during his fights, and while Tiago Trator has a decent submission game, Collard is pretty confident in his ability to not get tapped out, so I expect him to be the aggressor, and if the stand-up is not working for him, he can always mix in takedowns. He was even able to take Benitez's back in his last fight, just wasn't able to pick up a finish or anything, so I expect Collard to be aggressive in the feet, try to win those, and if it's working, he's going to stay there, and if it's not, he's going to mix in some takedowns. So I think this is Clay Collard's fight to lose, so he is my pick. Now dropping down to the women's bantamweight division, we have Jessica Andrade, who is 13-4, taking on Raquel Pennington, who is 5-6, in a rematch. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Andrade minus 190, the comeback on Pennington plus 150. And right now, looking over at the line of 5 dimes, it's Andrade minus 210. The comeback on Pennington is plus 175. Line did creep up a little bit more beyond that for Andrade. Now we're starting to see some Pennington action come back in as well. So there will be a decent amount of two-way action on this fight. I think we're still going to overall need Pennington to come through for most sports books out there, because I think the popularity and the ability of Andrade still amongst the bettors is going to be the more popular side. Now, as far as breakdown goes, man, this is going to be another close fight. Obviously, they fought before not too long ago, and we saw a competitive battle. In that fight, Andrade was a decent-sized favorite, and people were, I guarantee you, were sweating the result and the decision when it went to the scorecards because it was that close. It was a very competitive fight. I mean, both ladies definitely had their moments throughout. And it basically came down to Andrade's takedowns, to be honest with you. I think that was the main factor in her winning that last fight. Pennington, I think, had a little bit more success on the feet. She landed, I think, the better and more effective blows on the feet as well. And I think she's going to do that as well. And I think she's going to be a little bit more prepared this time to try to avoid those sneaky trip takedowns that Andrade has, which is very, very good. I mean, Andrade is smart by doing that. Andrade is also a very capable finisher on the feet, and she has that nasty guillotine choke she gets around your neck. So there's a lot of things to worry about offensively from Andrade, but you can say a lot of that same stuff about Pennington as well. I mean, Pennington, she's got a little bit of confidence now. Her close fight against Holly Holm, I think, and Holm is now obviously fighting for the title. So I think her confidence is going to be at an all-time high. I think her drive for this fight is going to be a little bit higher too, because she has a close competitive loss to Andrade. So we're going to see another barn burner type of fight. I think if it hits the scorecards, we're going to probably see another close competitive, maybe a split decision as well this time around. If there's going to be a finish, could see it going either way. I slightly lean towards Pennington though. I think Andrade's strike defense, her head strike defense, is actually a little bit uncomfortable for me. So I think Pennington can have a little bit more success. So if there's going to be a finish, I think it might be Pennington on the feet. If it hits the scorecards, I think it's going to be a really close fight. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Pennington. I know that's going against the grain, but I think she's going to be motivated. She's going to adjust enough that she's going to be able to adapt and perform a little bit better than she did in her first fight. But I am expecting a war and a great fight, so looking forward to it. But my official pick is going to be Pennington.
And I'm going to come in on the other side. This is, a pretty even matchup. Pennington is the bigger fighter, and honestly, she is slightly more technical of a striker. The problem is that Andrade is the more active striker. Pennington sometimes sits back a little bit too much and waits for that perfect shot, and even though she does that, she's still not as accurate as Andrade. So even though in the last fight Pennington did land a little bit more than Andrade, I can see Andrade stepping up the pace a little bit this time around. She's gained a little bit more confidence in her cardio. She's been able to go the distance effectively recently. So Andrade is still a real solid striker, very, very aggressive type of fighter, in your face constantly. And she's going to need to get inside if she wants to be effective against Pennington because of Pennington's reach advantage. And then in terms of the ground game, while Pennington does have a couple nifty submission tricks up her sleeve, and the ground game advantage should go to Andrade. She has the better wrestling. She should have the better takedowns. And I do think she has the better submissions because she does have a very effective guillotine choke if all else fails. So I think this is going to be an interesting matchup. Their last fight was pretty close, but Andrade did come out on the better end of it. And I can see Andrade gaining some confidence from that. And coming off of her last fight against Sarah Morris, where she was just very effective on the feet and was able to stuff a lot of takedowns. So I can see Andrade just trying to work over Pennington on the feet, and if that doesn't work, she does have the ground game to fall back to. So that's kind of where I see her main advantage here, is the fact that she is a little bit more well-rounded than Pennington, and she has multiple ways to potentially win this fight. The only thing I'm really worried about is slight short notice. She is stepping in for Liz Carmouche here, so I can see Andrade potentially being affected by that, but I don't think she would take this fight if she wasn't ready. So I expect her to come in. She didn't really take any damage against Morris, and she should be in pretty good shape. So I'm going to go with Jessica Andrade. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I can see why this is more of a toss-up, a coin flip type fight, because Jessica Andrade on paper looks better. She is superior in a lot of different metrics, but those stats are inflated by some absolute beatdowns that she put down on people like Rosie Sexton. I mean, the stats from that fight were astronomical. It was one of the most lopsided fights in UFC history. So that is inflating her numbers a little bit. And when they faced off the first time, those numbers did not hold true. Pennington actually was slightly busier than Andrade and even slightly more effective. She ended up losing the close decision, partially probably because of the takedowns that were punctuated in the middle there. But that was a very, very close fight. So I could see both sides of this. I could see why you might think Pennington, on paper might have won that fight or should have won that fight, and that she's going to be highly motivated to come in here and get the win and get revenge. Andrade, on the other hand, her striking is very good, and maybe she is also improving with time. So I see this as too close to call. I don't think either one of them will get the finish. So, I do see this going to a decision, and I expect it to be very close. It will be interesting to see who has evolved their game more since that first meeting, because Pennington looked very good on paper in that fight, but over the course of their careers, Andrade has looked better on paper in the long run. So yeah, again, I think we'll learn a lot about who's going to continue to evolve their game after this fight.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, sticking with the bantamweight division, this time on the men's side, we have Francisco Rivera, who is 11-4 with 1 no contest, taking on John Lineker, who is 25-7. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I open exactly a pick on -120 either way. So Rivera -120, Lineker -120. And right now we're seeing Lineker -115 and Rivera -105. So some back and forth action again on this fight, because early on it was action towards Rivera. And now we're seeing action back towards Lineker. So the sports books are going to be relatively close in action this way for this fight as well. And it is a barn burner, another one that's going to be tough, and it could go really back and forth. And a pick'em is kind of a fair line because of the way these guys fight, they match up relatively well with each other. Of course, the back end story of this one is Lineker's moving back up to 135 because he had a difficult weight cut at 125. I mean, a miserable weight cut in most cases. He wasn't able to get the job done and actually make weight. It's unfortunate for him because he was in line, honestly, for a title shot despite, those weight issues are really what held him back. I mean, he would have been right there in the mix, and with his power and his toughness overall, I mean, he's always going to be a threat to anybody he faces. So he kind of blew that. Now he's back at 135 and he's trying to earn his spot here. Now Rivera has looked really good. I mean, he's looked solid. I think he's actually better from fight to fight. In most cases, he's faced some high level competition recently as well, and he's done relatively well. So there's a lot of good things to say about Rivera. Of course, we all know what he brings to the table. Again, it's his toughness. It's his explosive power. He's got a good knockout ratio. His cardio is improving a little bit. His wrestling's improving. I mean, there's a lot of good things to like about Rivera. So that's why this fight is going to be interesting, because both these guys are really similar. I mean, as the fight goes on, they tend to slow down a little bit, but they both have devastating knockout power that with one punch can end it at any time. So even so that Lineker is moving up to 135, I still think he has a good shot of putting Rivera out. In fact, as far as toughness goes and chin goes, I actually rather be on Lineker's side, because Rivera does have somewhat of a suspect chin. He's been rocked before. He's been knocked out before as well. Now, I'm not saying Lineker's never been rocked. I know his strike defense is pretty bad at times as well, but I just trust his chin a little bit more than Rivera. So this thing is going to be a slugfest. I think their takedown defense is going to kind of neutralize each other out enough where it stays upright, and we're going to see a slugfest, which is what we all want to see. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Lineker, because I think even though he's going to be outsized a little bit, he's still going to be game enough, and I think he's still going to be dangerous enough and going to be sound enough that he's probably going to get the job done here. So not a confident pick, because realistically this fight could go either way, but I lean a little bit more towards Lineker in this spot.
Yeah, this fight's absolutely insane. I think a lot of people have been extremely excited about it ever since it was announced. And John Lineker moving up to the bantamweight division by force from UFC president Dana White, because he missed weight so many times in the flyweight division. He's not even a huge flyweight. He just has terrible trouble making the 125-pound limit. And hopefully that does not carry over to the bantamweight division and just make him get lazy with a 10 pounds extra allowance. But against a guy like Francisco Rivera, I mean, this is a dream matchup. Two guys that are just, close your eyes, bite down on the mouthpiece, and just start winging haymakers type of fighters. They have insane power and pretty high activity rate, and both have pretty good chins. So I'm expecting both guys to just be connecting with some huge shots. I mean, this could be an absolute war. This could be definitely one of the better fights of 2015 if it all plays out to how a lot of people are hoping. Now, the biggest things to keep track of, honestly, are because John Lineker is moving up to the bantamweight division, he's going to be the smaller fighter. He's 6 inches shorter than Rivera. He's given up about 3 inches in reach, And that could definitely be a factor if these guys are both swinging out some big, heavy looping punches, because Rivera will be able to do it from a little bit further away. So if Lineker can't close that distance, he could get in a little bit of trouble. That being said, I do think Lineker, being the younger, fresher guy, should be able to explode onto the inside and be able to connect. And while neither guy has really had any issues with getting knocked out, I do think that Lineker does have the better chin of the two. He can, while Rivera hasn't really been knocked out, he has been hurt, he's been dropped, and Lineker does have that type of power that can take advantage of that. And I think somebody's going out in this fight. Lineker has not really shown getting in trouble, so I don't expect it to be him. And I think at some point in this fight, even though he's giving up a little bit of size, John Lineker is, hell on wheels. And when he's got things going, I mean, he can really, really punish you. And I think in a slugfest type of situation that I think this fight is going to be, I don't expect a lot of takedowns. I don't expect really anything along the clinch. I don't expect anything on the canvas or submissions. I think John Lineker can win a slugfest, and he's going to connect at some point really hard, and I can see him putting away Francisco Rivera, who is a little bit older, a little bit more worn down, even though Lineker's fought a little bit more. So I'm going to go with John Lineker. I'm not crazy confident because, honestly, either of these guys could get the knockout, but I think Lineker can pull this one off. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they confirm a few important points that you guys pointed out. So first of all, knockdown power. These guys have tons of it. It is very high for their division. They have 12 combined knockdowns in the UFC, which is crazy. John Lineker has as many knockdowns as Frank Mir, which is insane. So, he is powerful, but you also pointed out he can be a little bit sloppy. He drops his hands. He does get hit a lot. And Francisco Rivera also has power and might be able to hit Lineker. However, there's another difference in defense on the flip side. Rivera's been dropped 4 times. So, Brian, you pointed out he hasn't been finished, but he has been hurt a lot. And that's actually concerning given who he's been going against. So against John Lineker, that is a big liability. Lineker is slightly more aggressive, pushes a higher pace, and outworks his opponents. And he's also a little bit more accurate with his power hand. It's a close call there, but he is probably going to be initiating more exchanges, willing to take a punch, but finding a way to hit his opponent. And so Rivera has to be really technical to avoid that shot. And his defense, his head strike defense is good, but when he gets hit, he does get hurt. So for that reason, I'm already leaning towards Lineker. He is slightly smaller, maybe a 3-inch reach differential, but he's also much younger and I think more durable. He's never been dropped. So that tells me that when these guys go toe-to-toe, and that's probably how this fight goes down because their takedown attempt rates are below average, they rarely go for takedowns. So I think they go toe-to-toe, and I think Lineker either is the busier man and wins some of the rounds, or he's the first one to really land a big shot because there's a lot of knockout potential here.
Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Ross Pearson, who is 19-9 with 1 no contest, taking on Paul Felder, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Felder minus 245, the comeback on Pearson plus 175. And right now, some fresh movement actually as we're recording this podcast. Felder is minus 440. The comeback on Pearson is plus 350. Across the market, as far as sportsbooks on the Don Best screen, there's still some 360s out there I see. So it's between 3.5 to 1, basically to 4.5 to 1 right now out there on Felder, depending on the sportsbook that you're looking at. I'm a bit surprised, to be honest with you. I opened up Felder what I thought was a decent price because typically Ross Pearson amongst the bettors is a very popular guy that gets action. I mean, at the sportsbooks, depending on who he's matched, of course, but a lot of people do believe in Pearson, his ability. He is a good fighter. He's fought really good competition throughout his career and has obviously had a lot of success. And on the feet, Pearson is a beast. He's got really good technical skill. He's got good fight IQ. He comes from a good camp in Alliance MMA, of course. He's got that knockout power to go along with it. It's just unfortunate for him. His chin is not the greatest. He does get clipped. His defense isn't that bad, really, overall. But once you do get through with a lot of power, Pearson's chin really doesn't hold up too well. So I think right now people are finally starting to realize that, and it really stems back from the fight with Iaquinta, when Iaquinta knocked him out, because after that, obviously, he performed relatively well. He knocked out Stout, and then his performance against Evan Dunham was mainly because he got out-grappled in that fight and controlled more than anything else. But in this fight with Felder, stylistically, it's a tough matchup. So I do understand why people are coming in. I'm just a little bit surprised because I wasn't sure that Felder would get this kind of respect out of the betting public that typically leans towards Pearson. But I'm wrong. And the betting public overall in the early action, some smart action, some, general action, a lot of people were believing in Felder in this fight, and it's hard to deny why. I mean, stylistically, Felder is a tough matchup for Pearson because Felder on the feet is a beast as well. I mean, he hits very hard. He has some technical ability. I mean, if you look at his recent fight against Barboza, that was a fairly close fight. I mean, Barboza is considered one of the best strikers at 155, and he has been for a long time. And Felder was going, punch for punch, kick for kick with him as well, and he looked good. I mean, he kept it competitive. He kept it a close fight, even though Barboza deserved to get the nod. Felder was game. He also showed us, I mean, at times, if you look back at his Sago fight, he actually got hurt in that fight a little bit against Sago. And Sago is really not known for striking. He's more of a grappling-based fighter. So, in my opinion, Felder's chin was a little bit yet to be determined at that point before his fight against Barboza. But his chin hung in there obviously well in that Barboza fight. So, in my opinion, he gained a little bit of that confidence back as far as having a solid chin overall. Now, against Pearson does hit really hard as well. So, wouldn't be shocking to see either one of these guys knock each other out. But I think that Felder can withstand some of the pressure that Pearson puts on. And I don't think Pearson's going to be able to withstand some of the pressure and accuracy and power that Felder has. Going back the other way. So I think wrestling-wise, you got to give the edge to Felder as well. Even though these guys aren't really going to look to go to the ground, they both prefer to stand and bang. I do lean towards Felder because of that reason. I think he has a better chin. He's going to be the more effective and more dangerous striker, and this fight is probably not going to hit the ground. He is actually, they're the same age, but in fight years, he is a younger fighter. He has more of an upside as far as the UFC lightweight division goes as well. I mean, they could really have some interesting matchups with Felder moving forward, especially if he gets this impressive win on his resume. I mean, Pearson is a solid name. He gets a lot of respect, so this would be a good quality one for Felder as well. So the upside is for Felder. I think he probably does get the job done, but where the line is now, man, it's kind of tough because laying 400 against Ross Pearson that has the ability to knock people out with one punch is kind of tough. So I'm not sure if there's quite any value left at minus 400. As there was originally, it might maybe minus 245, but I still have to go with Felder here to win this fight because I do think he probably ends up knocking Pearson out along the way. If the fight does hit the scorecards, it'll probably be competitive, but Felder probably gets the edge there as well. So Felder is going to be my pick. I think the betting action is correct early on, and I'm probably guessing we'll see the line drop a little bit by fight day because there's going to be some sharp action coming in on Pearson. Maybe not a whole lot. And then there's going to be some public action coming in Pearson's way as well because when you're seeing a guy that has that much talent and that much respect in the past, there's going to be people taking a chance on him, especially if they see the line has increased like it has. So this line should drop a little bit, but regardless, it's Felder's fight, in my opinion, these days to win or lose, and I think he's going to win it.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning Felder's way as well. I mean, I've always kind of backed Ross Pearson in most fights, maybe a little bit more than I should. But this time around, I just think it's a really bad stylistic matchup. I mean, Pearson is a guy that likes to put pressure on his opponents and has a really big right hand. But unless that big right hand connects really solidly on Paul Felder, I don't see how he can win this fight. I think Felder can hold his own with Pearson toe-to-toe standing. And the fact that Felder is taller and longer, plus, I think the more technical overall striker and the more dynamic striker just puts all of the variables in Felder's side. Felder, I think if he's going to lose to an extremely technical striker like an Edson Barboza in his last fight, or somebody that can, power him to the canvas and get some big takedowns. And Ross Pearson just isn't that type of fighter. I mean, he has a little bit of grappling, but he likes to stand and trade too. And he actually got out-grappled in his last fight by Evan Dunham. So, against Paul Felder, I think Felder is going to be much better in terms of the kicking game. He's going to be connecting solidly with everything at range. And then when he gets inside, Felder can mix it up. He has good elbows. He has good spinning attacks. And I think his pure technical boxing is better as well. So when you factor in that Ross Pearson has now been knocked out multiple times in his UFC career, I think the fact that Paul Felder has that ability to finish a fight at any moment from any type of strike, it definitely gives him a big edge. So I like Paul Felder pretty heavily here, and I understand why everybody's coming in on him. I mean, he just went toe-to-toe with Edson Barboza and had a good performance, didn't come out on top, but I think a lot of people were impressed, and I think he lives up to those expectations here against Ross Pearson. And as long as Pearson doesn't land that puncher's chance, then Paul Felder should win pretty convincingly. Now kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have Paige VanZant, who is 5-1, taking on Alex Chambers, who is 4-2, and this is in the women's strawweight division. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
VanZant minus 1,200, Chambers plus 600 was the opening line, and right now it is actually VanZant minus 1,450. The comeback on Chambers is plus 950. So I realize it seems like an outrageous line, but obviously still not stopping people from laying it straight and throwing VanZant parlays, even though it doesn't have much impact at that price. But still, people are very confident on VanZant. I think a lot of people think it's a sure thing. And you know what? It's hard to argue. I mean, just look at the setup in this fight. There's no doubt about it. Obviously, VanZant has looked outstanding in her UFC career thus far. And to be honest with you, Chambers is on the total opposite end of that. Even though she's coming off of a great come-from-behind win over Curran, she was getting dominated in that fight. I mean, she was getting beat in that fight. She was on her way to a loss. If she didn't catch that armbar, she would have lost that fight. And of course, she lost to Daly before that as well, and didn't have that much success on the Ultimate Fighter show. VanZant, on the other hand, that same Curran that was giving Chambers fits, she basically just ran through her in her UFC debut. So MMA math typically doesn't work, but in this case, if you look at it, it is what it is. I mean, VanZant shouldn't have many difficulties with Chambers here in this fight. I mean, even VanZant, a lot of people were thinking that Herrig would give her a tougher time. I mean, because Felice Herrig, especially on the ground, I mean, she has obviously a total skill set, but a lot of people thought that the transitions on the ground would kind of favor Herrig a little bit more, and VanZant has shown really her growth as a fighter overall. She's been training with Alpha Male now for a while. She's getting better fight by fight. She's getting more confidence. I mean, the public hype behind her, everything is really a good thing for VanZant right now. So she believes in herself. Her skill set's getting better. And this is basically a squash match. It is what it is. I mean, the UFC is feeding Chambers to VanZant for VanZant to get a really impressive performance. If not a highlight finish, she's at least going to dominate Chambers. So VanZant's going to roll, and that's about it.
Yeah, this one's sweet and simple. This fight is picture perfect, made for Paige VanZant to look good. They're bringing her along slowly, so I don't know about giving her a title shot right away. I mean, if they really wanted to do that, they would have given her a top 15 opponent after she beat Felice Herrig, who was a top 15 opponent. But Alex Chambers, definitely on the lower end of the UFC women's strawweight division. She is 1-1, but I mean, honestly, she has not looked good at all, barring that just third-round armbar that came out of nowhere against Curran. Now, Paige, on the other hand, has exceeded all expectations. I mean, she just is relentless, constantly looking for takedowns, getting in her opponent's face, pushing them against the fence, throwing strikes with reckless abandon, and then once she gets them to the ground, constantly throwing strikes. I mean, she just wears you down with that relentless pressure. I mean, there's really no breaks with Paige VanZant. She wears you down. And against Alex Chambers, I can definitely see Paige VanZant not just wearing her down, but getting a finish. In this fight, I mean, there's a whopping 15-year age gap between them. Paige is only 21 years old. Alex Chambers is 36. And I think this is going to be a complete blowout. On the feet, Chambers is okay. Like, maybe she'll be able to hold her own briefly, but just with the way Paige is closing the distance and then looking to drag you to the ground, unless Chambers pulls out another miracle submission, I think Paige VanZant rolls here. She's going to get top position. She's going to start dropping some bombs. She's going to land that ground and pound, and she's going to wear Chambers out. And I just think Chambers wilts under that pressure, and eventually Paige will get that stoppage victory. So Paige VanZant is my pick. Now moving all the way up to the men's light heavyweight division, we have Jan Blachowicz, who is 18-4, taking on Corey Anderson, who is 6-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Blachowicz minus 165, the comeback on Anderson plus 125, and right now it's Blachowicz minus 150, the comeback on Anderson is plus 130. So line margins tightened up a little bit, and there's not a lot of action coming in this fight. It's some small action, two-way action going back and forth on this fight as well. A lot of split opinions out there on this fight. A little bit surprised, because really, I mean, if you think about it, Anderson had a lot of hype coming into his fight before he lost to his last fight, obviously, to VanZant. A lot of people believe that this guy could be a future contender. I mean, he's athletic, of course. He has a wrestling background. He's got good boxing. He's got good speed. He's got decent fight IQ. He's got good conditioning. There's a lot of good things to like about Anderson, no doubt about it. But one bad loss, and then all of a sudden it seems like a lot of people just kind of throw you away and they're like, you're not as good as we thought. And you can't blame him in a way, you know, honestly. I mean, when you have such high expectations for a fighter and then he lets you down like that, it's a little bit understandable. But in this case against Blachowicz, it's an interesting fight because Blachowicz was kind of one of these guys that were flying under the radar until he did make his official UFC debut, and they looked really good, obviously, by getting the quick knockout win over Latifi in his debut. So that really raised his stock because outside of the UFC, he faced decent level competition before he made his debut, and he was pretty impressive on the Euro scene. So a lot of hype behind Blachowicz, but he got that respect mainly when he did knock off Latifi when he did. Now, Manuwa in his last fight, you know, he did get controlled up against the cage. Manuwa actually in his last fight was actually injured. I mean, it was reported that he was injured coming into that fight too, and he still managed to control Blachowicz and be the aggressor in that fight and dictate the pace of that fight, and that's kind of why Blachowicz lost. But talent-wise, it is Blachowicz's fight to win or lose because he is the more technical fighter. He is the more well-rounded fighter. Anderson is a bit behind him. Now, of course, Anderson is a younger fighter as well, and I think Anderson has a bigger upside. So he could catch up to the abilities or, you know, with experience as he progresses into UFC in his career, he can eventually, you know, catch up on as far as the technical aspects of the game that Blachowicz has over him. But that being said, I still think in this fight, Anderson comes in with a good game plan. He can probably win this fight because I think Blachowicz, even though he's the more technical fighter, at times, I mean, he can be controlled. We saw that in his last fight against Manuwa. I think Anderson is the better wrestler in this fight, even though the wrestling for Blachowicz isn't bad. I mean, I think that that might get neutralized a little bit here. I do think that Anderson might end up actually controlling this fight up against the cage and kind of slowing this fight down, but being still the more active fighter, if that makes sense. So Blachowicz, that's one thing that bothers me about him is at times he gets tentative and he doesn't get busy enough, and that could cost him the fight. And against a fighter like Anderson, I think it is probably going to be the case. So this fight, if it ends inside, there's a good chance I think that Blachowicz is the one finishing Anderson, because if we've seen anything so far early on, it's Anderson is hittable and his chin is a little bit suspect. I'm not just saying that from VanZant. If you look back, I mean, with some of his other fights as well, Anderson is hittable and he has been tagged and rocked a little bit as well. So if Blachowicz can do that and have some success on the feet with his power, then sure, he can win this fight. But I think if he does not win, or if he does not win that way, if he doesn't finish Anderson inside, I think he loses on the cards. So I think Anderson is good enough to survive in this spot. So that's why I'm actually going to pick Anderson to win this fight as well, because I do think he's going to be the busier, more active fighter. He's going to look to rebound and, you know, get back on track here because of all the potential he once had, I think, in most people's minds. So he could get a lot of that respect back with a quality win here. And I think it is a winnable fight for him. So this is another ultra competitive fight, good matchmaking here, but I think it is a fight that Anderson can win. So I'm going to go against the grain here and pick Anderson to win the fight.
Yeah, for a guy with a nickname of Beastin' 25-8, you would think that his cardio would hold up, but he definitely slowed down in that last fight against Gian Villante, and it ended up costing Corey Anderson the win as Villante was able to score the late knockout. Now, Jan Blachowicz looked really bad in his last fight as well. I mean, he just got pushed into the fence and held, and it was ugly. And, you know, a one-legged Jimi Manuwa was able to defeat him. And honestly, I thought Blachowicz would be performing a lot better than that. So both of these guys are coming off of very disappointing performances, but at least Blachowicz didn't get finished. Corey Anderson, he is the better athlete than Jan Blachowicz. He is able to wrestle very well. He can go. He's quick. He can get in and out. But Blachowicz is definitely the more technical striker. He mixes it up on the feet better. He has some really powerful body kicks, which Anderson is going to have to be careful about, because if Blachowicz lands enough of those, they can just suck the life right out of you. And Anderson could definitely be completely gassed by the end of the third round. So this fight is very close to me. If Anderson is able to get takedowns, if Anderson's able to pressure Blachowicz into the fence, he could win. Anderson could potentially hold his own on the feet briefly, but I don't think he can do it long term against Blachowicz. But this is just a very interesting stylistic matchup. And it just depends what Blachowicz shows up. If the aggressive Blachowicz arrives that put away Ilir Latifi quickly, then he can definitely win this fight. If the guy that is inactive and sits around and has a staring contest and lets his opponent dictate everything, like the last time we saw him, then Corey Anderson can definitely win this fight and bounce back. Anderson is still the younger, fresher type of fighter, so he has a lot to prove, and he could improve enough that he could win this fight, but I'm going to go with the experienced veteran here, and I'm going to side with Jan Blachowicz, but I'm not that confident about it. Now, sticking with the light heavyweight division, we have Anthony Johnson, who is 19-4, taking on Jimi Manuwa, who is 15-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Johnson minus 600, the comeback on Manuwa plus 400, and right now it is Johnson minus 550. The comeback is plus 425. So line margins tightened up a little bit. There is two-way action again on this fight coming in. Believe it or not, even with such a high line for Anthony Johnson, I think a lot of people were surprised to see it that way. But at the same time, look, it's staying steady. So, I mean, regardless of what people think about Anthony Johnson right now, I know he might not be the most popular guy amongst some of the personal issues that he's had recently. The guy is a devastating fighter. I mean, he was that close to winning the title against Daniel Cormier. I mean, the only reason he did not win it is because Cormier has such a granite chin. I mean, credit to him. But, I mean, Johnson, look what he's done in his UFC resurgence in his career at 205. It's been amazing, really. The guy it's definitely a knockout threat. I mean, his win over Gustafsson alone, I mean, how he dominated that fight was impressive, because obviously we all know that Gustafsson is highly regarded, and he was right there. It's his toughest test to date. So that's the kind of dominance that really Anthony Johnson and the kind of knockout power that he has that's got him to that spot where he is right now. And not to be outdone, I mean, his wrestling is not really that bad. Along the way, he's worked on other areas of his MMA game for sure. His training at the Black Zillions has definitely impacted his game greatly. So he's had a long career, a successful career for a reason. But right now, he's really in his prime. I mean, everything mentally, physically is coming together for Johnson. Of course, his cardio could be a little bit better. That's always seemed to hinder him, especially in a 5-round fight. But this is not a 5-round fight. This is against Manuwa, who also does tend to fade as the fight goes on as well. But Manuwa is a very dangerous striker in his own right. I mean, the guy is powerful. He has some accuracy for sure to go along with it. He pushes a very high pace at times. I mean, at times he does get a little tentative as well. He might stall the action by pushing you up against the cage and holding you there. I mean, his win against Blachowicz, I think, was pretty impressive, considering he was hurt going into that fight as well. And Blachowicz is no slouch at all. I mean, it tells you the guy definitely has some talent. And he can really be a threat to most. But against Anthony Johnson, I mean, if we see a straight out slugfest, sure, Manuwa could possibly land and do some damage in Johnson and possibly put him out there. But at the same time, I think if they start exchanging, I think Johnson does hit a little bit harder. I think he is the more accurate striker, his experience, everything to go about it. With Johnson, especially, I think his overall game. Manuwa has been put on his back before. I think if Johnson needs to, or if he feels like it, he could probably use his wrestling to get Manuwa down on the floor as well, control him, land some nasty ground and pound, and then probably get him out of there. So it is Johnson to win or lose. A hard fight to bet, honestly, where the line is for sure. Hard to even put him in a parlay with this, because is there really a lot of value around minus 500-600 on Anthony Johnson in this spot? I'm not really sure that's the case here. So it's probably a better situation is just avoid this fight altogether, or it is a dog or pass situation if you feel like Manuwa has a better chance than the odds currently indicate. But it's a tough one. I do think Johnson is going to win the fight, though, and I think he's probably going to win it in impressive fashion, to be honest with you as well. So the pick is Anthony Johnson. I think he does get back on track and make another potential push for a title shot.
Yeah, this is a much better matchup than what they had originally done with Johnson against Jan Blachowicz. But that being said, I still expect Anthony Johnson to not just win, but win relatively impressively here. Jimi Manuwa, as good as an athlete as he is and as dangerous as he is, he's just not quite on that level of Anthony Johnson. Johnson's a guy that has gone in there against some really tough fighters and absolutely obliterated them. I mean, he went out in his return to the UFC, beat Phil Davis easily, which was very impressive. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, especially me. And then Nogueira just blasted him. And then, of course, the big one, and this is the one that, is going to put a lot of factor into this actual fight was Johnson's performance against Alexander Gustafsson, because the way that he just blitzed him and put him away in the first round, it was extremely impressive, especially because Manuwa had already faced Gustafsson before, and Gustafsson ended up knocking Manuwa out. So, I know MMA math is not the best idea of all time, but when you look at it in comparison for similar opponents, when they both faced, Gustafsson, it was clearly Anthony Johnson that got the better end of that. And I can definitely see Jimi Manuwa being at 35 years old. He's going to have some issues. I mean, if he got knocked out by Gustafsson, he is 100% capable of being knocked out by Anthony Johnson. Johnson hits incredibly hard, possibly harder than anybody in the light heavyweight division right now, which is incredible considering the guy used to fight at welterweight. But he hits super hard. He is incredibly dangerous. And while Johnson does have his faults, those faults are usually only able to be exploited by, elite wrestlers. Daniel Cormier, maybe in welterweight when he fought Josh Koscheck, those type of fighters. Jimi Manuwa does not possess those type of tools. Johnson's the better wrestler here. Manuwa is dangerous with some pretty good Muay Thai skills in the clinch, but how often is Anthony Johnson going to let himself get stuck in the clinch? I mean, this is a guy that is incredibly motivated to get back in that title picture. I mean, he did drop Daniel Cormier with his first punch in his title fight, but he just couldn't quite weather that wrestling attack. So this time around, I think he's looking out to make a statement and then hopefully get right back in that title picture with either this win or potentially one more. So I expect Anthony Johnson to win, probably by knockout in the first or second rounds. And especially with this being a 3-round fight, you don't have to worry about Johnson gassing either. Although Manuwa hasn't looked great in the later rounds either. So I think Anthony Johnson wins pretty impressively. So I'm definitely on Anthony Johnson here. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the technical striking here, I think, is the key. Both guys are accurate, but defensively, Manuwa gets hit a lot and Johnson rarely gets hit. And then you factor in the power. So Anthony Johnson is one of the hardest hitters in UFC history. 11 knockdowns already. He's on the record books, working his way up, in terms of knockdown power. So this spells disaster for Manuwa if he doesn't improve his strike defense, because he has been dropped before and he's willing to go toe to toe, and he is 35 and a half now, the much older fighter. So even though he's dangerous offensively, Anthony Johnson is quite durable in his striking game. He's gone toe to toe with heavyweights, Arlovski, for example, who's fighting in the next fight. So I think Johnson here is definitely the play. I mean, he's definitely going to win. I think, the odds are obviously pretty high. The question is, does he get a finish? And I think he does. At some point, I think he lands something nasty that puts Manuwa away. He just hasn't reached the full potential. Some of it's been injury. Some of it was the fact that he kind of came in late. But, while he is dangerous, he just doesn't look as dangerous on paper as Anthony Johnson. So I got to go with Johnson here.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a thrilling heavyweight matchup between a pair of veterans in Andrei Arlovski, who is 24-10 with one no contest, taking on Frank Mir, who is 18-9. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Arlovski minus 180, Mir plus 140 was my opening number. Right now it's minus 155 for Arlovski, the comeback on Mir plus 135. So line margins tightened a little bit, and there is two-way action coming in on this fight, and Arlovski creeped up a little bit early on, and now again, we're getting some underdog action a little bit back on Mir, and we're going to continue, I think, to see some two-way action on this fight as well. A lot of competitive fights, across the board. You gotta love the UFC's matchmaking these days. So this is another one. This is honestly a coin flip type of fight, in my opinion, as well. You gotta really be surprised by the resurgence of both these guys. Honestly, a few years ago, there was no way, if you would have told me that Arlovski would be in title contention in the UFC, I would have laughed. If you look back at his fight, after he left the UFC, or he was released by the UFC, Arlovski fought outside of the UFC and really didn't fare too well. His win over Travis Fulton was a lot more competitive than that should have been as well. His fight again with Ray Lopez, and that was in the Pro Elite organization, I believe. So he had some losses back to back, and then the wins that he started getting were terrible as well. So give credit to Greg Jackson and crew and Arlovski for really getting him turned around mentally, physically, everything about him, getting him the confidence back, matching him up properly, I guess, along the way as well, because he's really looked, kind of like back in the old days. A throwback to the old Arlovski for sure. And I think mentally, physically, confidence-wise, everything is going right for him. He's always been dangerous on the feet. He's got great hands. He's got powerful hands. He's an accurate striker, has the heart, has good conditioning. There's a lot of great things to like about Arlovski. Mir, you could say a lot of the same things about him as well, as far as a little bit of a resurgence here. Not as much as Arlovski. And I think, honestly, the drop-off in skill level, what Arlovski went through with all the losses and all the knockouts he was suffering, a few years back, Mir didn't quite have that amount of drop-off, although he has looked spotty at times as well with some of his performances. But the last two fights, again, we've seen a much better Frank Mir, a much more mature Frank Mir. He's always had the skill again to go along with it. He's had knockout power. We haven't really seen the striking like we are now these days with the Frank Mir fight. He's always had probably a little bit underrated power and underrated striking to go along with it, but it's his ground game that really put him to the forefront in the UFC heavyweight division. Now we're starting to see a more complete Frank Mir. And in the past, my problem with Mir was really if he faced a dangerous striker, somebody that would put a lot of pressure on him, and he couldn't kind of have his way with that opponent, he would wilt under pressure. Was basically my main problem and issue with Frank Mir, is his chin was always a little bit suspect, but more than that, he kind of had that quit in him, and I didn't like that. But I think that he's honestly losing some of that quit. If you look at his last couple fights again, especially his last win over Todd Duffy, he went out there and laid it on the line. He was not in fear in that fight at all. He wasn't going to quit. He was out there to win that fight. He, like I said, just kind of let it all hang out there, and he was effective. His striking looked great. He was confident. He was accurate. He wasn't intimidated at all. So that aggression is very dangerous for any heavyweight in the UFC if Frank Mir comes out like that, no doubt. Of course, that could leave some openings to get hit, of course, and might not be the greatest defense for Mir, but still, impressive to say the least. So we have two guys that have really reinvented themselves and have confidence right now and have good camps behind them and really at a good state in their careers. And the winner of this fight is in title contention, which is remarkable again. So for me, this is a tough one. I could really see it going back and forth because both these guys have so much knockout power and both of these guys have suspect chins. See, let's not forget something right now. Arlovski, that chin didn't get better all of a sudden. He's more confident. His defense is better and he hasn't been getting knocked out. But if Frank Mir lands on him like he landed on he's going night-night for sure. There's no doubt about it. And of course, you could say a lot of the same thing. If Arlovski lands clean on Mir, Mir's going to get put to sleep as well. But I'm going to lean a little bit more with Mir because I think that fearlessness that I've seen in him recently is not going to be good for Arlovski. I think that he can land. I think Mir, I do trust, if this makes sense, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I do trust Mir's chin a little bit more these days than I do Arlovski still. And I'm going to go that route. I think I'm going to pick Mir to probably knock Arlovski out. If he hits the scorecards, I'm sure it's going to be competitive, but I don't think this one's going to go. I think these guys are going to let it all hang out again. It's going to be an exciting fight, and I think Mir is going to probably end up knocking Arlovski out. So that's going to be my pick.
Yeah, this is a great fight. A lot of people were surprised it never happened back in the day when both of them were champs about the same time. But, they just never managed to meet up. And it's crazy now that they're meeting up at this point in their careers because they're both right back on track. Arlovski's looked really good his last couple fights. Frank Mir's been able to bounce back nicely with a pair of knockout wins. So, they're meeting each other at a very important point. If Arlovski wins, he's definitely right in line for a title shot. If Mir wins, he's right back in the thick of the title hunt, which is crazy to think because both of these guys were in such bad shape at just a year or so ago or a couple years ago. But now, Andrei Arlovski and Frank Mir are both right there. And honestly, when you look at this fight, neither guy has a great chin. Both guys can definitely be finished, and both guys can get the finish. Both guys have a lot of power. Both guys cannot take a lot of damage. And both guys, especially lately, have really enjoyed just throwing down big, wild, crazy fights. Arlovski's last fight against Travis Brown was a barn burner, even though it was just one round. It was one of the best fights of 2015. They just traded huge shots. Both got hurt. Both were hurting each other. And then with Frank Mir's last fight against Todd Duffy, that's a young, talented guy, and Frank Mir just went right after him. Didn't try to weather that early storm. Instead, just took the fight to him. and was able to pick up a clean knockout, one of the more vicious knockouts in the heavyweight division this year. So, both guys are coming in with a ton of momentum, picking up some quality wins over some really tough guys, some tough, powerful heavyweights, and both have a lot of confidence. What's interesting is, both guys have actually trained together too. I mean, Arlovski and Mir, they were both at Jackson's about the same time, but I think Mir has started to focus a little bit back towards Vegas. He's been working with Ricky Lundell, and his boxing has improved drastically. I think he's been reducing his sparring. He's been adding a little bit more rest, and it's made him a bit fresher. And with Arlovski, he's definitely turned his career around with just being a very aggressive and going right after people, and maybe he's getting people at the right time. I think he definitely was very familiar with Travis Brown when they fought, so I think that definitely helped. But that was a monumental win for him. I mean, that's a huge win. I did not expect him to pick that one up. I thought that his hype was going to come crashing to a halt in that Travis Brown fight, but it didn't. He looked composed. He stuck with it, and even though he got hurt at one point in that fight, I mean, he was in control for most of it. So this is a terrific fight. And honestly, the way this fight's going to pan out is the first guy that gets hurt really badly is going to lose, I think, because neither guy has a tremendous chin. Both guys have a ton of power. And while I do think Frank Mir is a little bit more well-rounded because he does have that submission game to fall back on, Frank Mir doesn't have the greatest wrestling, and I don't see Frank throwing Andrei Arlovski around because of Arlovski's combat sambo background. So this fight is almost certainly going to take place 100% on the feet, and it's just going to come down to who lands that first big shot. Both guys are about the same size. Both guys are about the same reach. Arlovski is probably the more technical striker, but I think Mir can hold his own there. I mean, he does, he can change stances, he can mix it up, he can counter. He's looked really good with his pure boxing in his last couple fights, so I would not be surprised one bit to see Mir go right after Arlovski, just like the Travis Brown fight. I think this could be just a toe-to-toe type of war, and I'm actually going to go Mir. I think he might have a little bit of extra confidence here, and I think he's going to go right after him, and he might be able to crack that chin and put him away. So I'm going with Frank Mir, although honestly, either guy could win this fight by knockout. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they confirm there is a ton of power here. 17 combined knockdowns between them. They both have abnormally high knockdown rates, but Frank Mir per punch is way higher. In fact, he is the highest knockdown rate in UFC history, which is kind of crazy because he has a long career. So that's among established veterans with enough sample size. So Frank Mir knows how to knock people out, even though he's probably more famous for his submission game. These guys are both 36. They're both big. Mir will have a slight reach advantage and the southpaw advantage, and his counter left is looking pretty nasty these days. So you're right. Arlovski might be the more technical striker. He tends to work at a higher pace. He tends to be more aggressive. He's a little bit more accurate, and he has slightly better head strike avoidance. But chin-wise, he's been dropped 5 times, and that is per strike much more often than Frank Mir. So his chin is worse. Now Arlovski is certainly not going to want to take this to the ground. Frank Mir's submission game is world class. And Arlovski doesn't really attempt a lot of takedowns to begin with. So if it does end up on the mat, it's probably Frank Mir that puts it there. And that could be something that maybe stalls this fight a little bit. Frank Mir is vocally saying he's not really thrilled about this matchup, has a lot of respect for Arlovski. We may not see him as aggressive, but it might be Arlovski's aggression, his tendency to come forward, that ends up setting up the finish. Either he's very assertive and catches Frank Mir early on because he's just not ready for that yet, or Mir answers with that counter left again because his boxing has been on point lately. So yeah, I agree with you. I think given that Mir is an underdog here, I would take that. I think he has value. He's been an underdog in his last 2 fights, and he's knocked everybody out. Arlovski, don't forget, he went toe to toe with Brendan Schaub and narrowly squeaked through a decision there that was somewhat controversial. But his other fights where he finished Travis Brown and Bigfoot are more impressive, although not entirely unexpected, in my opinion. So this is a very close fight on paper. Agree that the line should not diverge too much, but I do like the value on Mir.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening. We have a flyweight title rematch between champion Demetrious Johnson, who is 21-2-1, taking on John Dodson, who is 18-6. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Johnson, minus 400. The comeback on Dodson, plus 310. And right now it's minus 550 for Johnson. The comeback on Dodson is plus 425. That's right. When are you ever going to see Dodson at plus 425? Not very often. But in this case, it's believable. I mean, that's how dominant, again, Demetrious Johnson is. Comparable in some ways to Ronda Rousey. I'm saying that because, I mean, the guy has basically cleaned out his division, it seems. I mean, he's on his second to go around now with Dodson getting that shot again, which he deserves, of course. But as far as title contention go, there's honestly probably only a handful of guys that could even compete and challenge Johnson at this time. And Dodson is definitely one of them. But you're still seeing Johnson at a 5-1 favorite for a reason. I mean, the guy is really phenomenal. From fight to fight, the guy keeps on improving, no doubt about it. He's always had a well-rounded skill set. Matt Hume is a very underrated trainer. Working with him for years now has really been a great thing for Demetrious Johnson. His confidence is at an all-time high. I mean, in my opinion, there's not much flaw at all in Johnson's game. I mean, the guy is the total package. He's got a good chin. He's got outstanding cardio. He's got great jiu-jitsu. He's got good wrestling, everything. I mean, you like to see in him. Good fight IQ. He listens to his trainer. I mean, really, pound for pound, he is one of the best fighters on the planet, period. Now, that being said, Dodson is a very dangerous opponent because you could say a lot of the similar traits in Dodson as well. He's got good wrestling. He's got explosive power. One of the hardest hitters at 125, no doubt about it. Comes from a great camp. He has decent jiu-jitsu. He doesn't use it very often, but he's got a good ground game as well. So he's got the total package. It just, the problem with Dodson is he does have a little bit more flaw. And that is one of the reasons his cardio, and this is a 5-round fight. Dodson does tend to slow down as the fight goes. So Johnson does have a big cardio edge in this fight as well. Obviously, we're going to expect Dodson to come in here prepared for sure. So I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, but Johnson is going to be the busier fighter here as well. So Dodson is explosive enough that he can definitely end anybody's night with one punch. I mean, he almost did it last time in their close competitive fight with Demetrious Johnson. He rocked him, almost put him out there, and it could happen again. So that he does have a puncher's chance, no doubt about it. But when it comes down to it in that last fight as well, Johnson pretty much handled him in all areas. I mean, wrestling, clinch, accuracy, just overall effectiveness, I think, minus, again, the knockdown that Dodson had there. But I think across the board, I mean, the advantages lied in Johnson, even though it was a competitive fight and the judges called it a split decision. Johnson deserved to win that fight. He was a better fighter. And I think since that time, honestly, I haven't seen as much improvement from Dodson, but I have seen the level increase in Johnson overall. I mean, with everything across the board. So I do think that Johnson is a better version of what we've seen last time, and I'm not sure what we're going to see out of Dodson. I know in his last fight against Makovsky was a little bit of a letdown in most people's eyes, but there is a background there as well. So I'm sure we didn't see the best Dodson we could see there. Of course, he was coming in off of injury as well. So we're going to see, I think, a better Dodson in this fight than we did even against Makovsky. So I'm not counting him out completely, but at the same time, it is Demetrious Johnson's fight to win or lose here. And I think he is going to win this fight. I think it probably hits the scorecards because Dodson is a very tough guy to stop, but I do think we're going to see maybe an easier or a little bit cleaner decision from Demetrious Johnson here. It's hard to go against the guy. I mean, he's the man. So unless he gets caught with something crazy, he's going to win this fight. So my pick is Demetrious Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to like Demetrious Johnson. The guy isn't just amazing. He continues to improve. He doesn't settle for just being amazing. He wants to be the best. He wants to be the best fighter in the world. And in my opinion, I think he is the number one pound for pound fighter in the world, if you're not counting John Jones, since he's not the champ right now. But with Johnson versus Dodson, Dodson was the guy that pushed Johnson to his limit in terms of his title fights. He gave him his toughest title fight. It was a very close, very competitive battle, and Dodson almost won. I mean, he had Johnson on the ropes. That being said, that was a while ago. That was over 2.5 years ago. And since then, John Dodson has had a myriad of health issues. He's had a really bad knee injury. And when he came back off of that knee injury, he did not look good in that last fight against Zach Makovsky. I mean, that was a close, competitive decision. And while Makovsky is a good fighter, he's not even close to Demetrious Johnson's level. And the fact that he made that competitive with Dodson is terrifying. I think, Dodson's really going to have to step up his game here, because the last time around, Dodson ran out of steam and Johnson was able to win the last 2 rounds to eke out the decision after getting hurt a couple times in the first few rounds. And I can definitely see Demetrious Johnson going hard for all 5 rounds and wearing Dodson out again, because, it's always tough to improve that cardio, especially coming off of a knee injury like that. So, Dodson, he has some of the best athleticism in the flyweight division, potentially in the entire UFC, and he has relied on that a lot, but that athleticism does slow down as the fight wears on. Johnson, on the other hand, he can go all 5 rounds, no problem. I mean, he pulled off a submission with 1 second left in the 5th round of his last fight against Horiguchi. So, I mean, this guy can get a finish at any moment, at any point in a fight, first round or the very last second of the 5th round. And, if people saying he's boring, I mean, the guy's finished 3 of his last 4 title fights, so he's taking care of business. I mean, Demetrious Johnson is elite. He has some of the best striking in the flyweight division. He doesn't have the most power, so Dodson will have that power advantage. But Johnson has the best transitions. I think he has some of the best wrestling in the flyweight division, some of the best ground game. He is just all around the most pound for pound dangerous fighter, in my opinion. And I expect Johnson to just completely try to take Dodson out of his game. He's going to be using a lot of clinch. He's going to work some takedowns, and Dodson is going to have to spend a lot of energy, exert a lot of his power to try to just keep the fight where he wants it, which is in open space. And when they're in open space, one other thing you have to keep an eye on is the fact that Demetrious Johnson is so technical and can get in there and land his strikes. And Dodson, while he has so much power, he has a really bad tendency to sit back and stare at his opponent a little too much and let the fight come to him too often. And he's not a guy that is usually going after you. And I think he needs to be the hunter a little bit against Demetrious Johnson this time around, and I'm just not sure he's going to be able to do that. And I just expect Demetrious Johnson to pull away with this one, and especially with Dodson coming off of that injury and not looking good in his last fight, I think Johnson wins more convincingly this time around, unless Dodson lands that puncher's chance. But overall, my pick is going to be Demetrious Johnson. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, no surprise. I think there's general agreement here. Demetrious Johnson is a very technical fighter, and he is well-rounded absolutely everywhere. And his wrestling has been a huge advantage. I mean, he is not afraid to attempt a lot of takedowns. He's very good at landing them. And basically, with the exception of when he was in a larger weight class, he's been pretty dominant at flyweight. So 7 consecutive title defenses is pretty good. So Dodson, on the other hand, has all the knockout power. 7 knockdowns to date, an 8% knockdown rate. That's the highest in the flyweight division. He is very dangerous with his hands. But when they fought the first time, we did not see the usual John Dodson, who is able to basically control the fight, land nasty combinations. Demetrious Johnson was just picking him apart. Lots of kicks, mixed in with takedowns. John Dodson was obviously looking for the counter, and that has been what has saved him in a lot of fights. That's how he's beaten people and knocked people out, is he catches them coming forward because he is so fast. But Demetrious Johnson, his head strike defense is exceptionally good. And Dodson is going to have to be very lucky to land such an aggressive shot on Johnson. And it's just a smaller probability that actually happens. I mean, I think the longer the fight goes, obviously Dodson's going to lose some of that pop, especially if Mighty Mouse is mixing in a lot of wrestling. So he could grind Dodson down. He could outpoint him on the feet. He's still dangerous with submissions right up to the bell, as Brian said. So he has a lot of paths to victory here. John Dodson has one clear path to victory, and that's landing something so big that Johnson can't recover from it. And remember, he did get rocked in their first fight, but he came back and he still dominated and he still won a clear decision. So, the safe pick here is Johnson. I'm a little worried about where the price goes, because Dodson does have the potential here for a knockout. but it's just not big enough to count on. So I think the better play here is to take more specific angles with this matchup.
And that'll do it for today's podcast, but Reed Kuhn does have a special message for all of our longtime listeners, so take it away, Reed.
Yeah, so this is to announce this is actually my last appearance on the podcast. Some people may know I moved to Silicon Valley. I'm actually starting a job with a startup. So while my podcast appearances will disappear, I'm still going to be providing content to the MMA Oddsbreaker website. I'm also going to be providing Uber Tales of the Tape, some stats for premium members who are buying the premium plays. So my presence will not disappear. I'm still going to be participating and contributing to the website, and I hope people continue to like the content that I'm generating here. And this has been fun. The podcast comes to an end for me, but I know Nick and Brian will continue to be providing excellent analysis, well-researched analysis, as I always do. And this has been an enjoyable experience. I want to thank you guys, but I'm not going too far. So you're still going to be seeing plenty of my graphs on MMAOB. So that part won't be going anywhere, but just wanted to address the fact that I will no longer be on the podcast. So thanks to all who listened, and thanks to you guys.
I'd like to personally thank Reed Kuhn for all his work he's put into our podcast since we debuted nearly 2 years ago in November of 2013. His contributions will definitely be missed. Now, part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night following the weigh-in, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of the homepage for either Nick's or Mike James's premium bets. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.